The university auditorium was alive with low hums of conversation, the clatter of chairs, the rustle of papers, and the occasional tap of a laptop keyboard. Students milled about, professors moved with quiet authority, and a few prominent guests mingled near the front, exchanging polite greetings and handshakes. Among them, Jasmine Crockett walked with calm determination. She wasn't flashy, didn't demand attention with loud gestures or dramatic entrances, but the presence she carried made people notice. She had spent months preparing for this panel discussion, a debate on accessibility in education, and her mind ran through the points she had rehearsed. Not because she wanted to dominate the conversation, but because she wanted to give a voice to students who rarely had one. In the front row, almost hidden behind the heads of a group of professors, sat Barron. He lounged casually in his chair, the kind of posture that spoke of confidence, or maybe boredom. His expression carried a smirk, the kind that seemed to say, "This will be easy and, honestly, a bit amusing." He glanced around, observing the room as if the discussion was an insignificant social performance, a routine lecture rather than a conversation with weight. To him, debates about scholarships and student struggles were abstract problems, not real lives. Yet his gaze lingered, not out of interest, but because curiosity has a way of sneaking in even when pride refuses to acknowledge it. Jasmine stopped near the podium. She adjusted her notes, though she didn't really need them. Everything she wanted to say was already clear in her mind, shaped by the countless experiences she had seen and felt. She took a slow, measured breath, and the room gradually quieted, sensing that the conversation was about to begin in earnest. Her voice, when it came, was steady and confident. Not loud, not theatrical, but compelling in a way that drew people in naturally. She started with a scenario, not numbers or statistics. She painted a picture of a student named Miguel, someone who worked tirelessly to balance school with 2 part-time jobs. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, of building a future that could lift his family from struggle. Yet every day felt like a battle between ambition and the harsh reality of financial limits. The room leaned in, and even Barron's smirk faltered slightly. He tilted his head, curious now. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, but there was a shift in his posture, subtle but noticeable. Jasmine continued, describing how Miguel stayed up late into the night, poring over textbooks that were already worn and torn, borrowed or secondhand. She explained how he skipped meals, how he sacrificed social time and sleep just to keep up with classes that demanded attention, effort, and sometimes luck. The audience could feel the weight of Miguel's life through her words. Simple yet vivid enough to make even the most skeptical listener imagine themselves in his shoes. Her argument wasn't just about money. It was about opportunity. She spoke of education as a tool that should be accessible to anyone willing to work, regardless of their bank account or family background. She emphasized the unfairness of a system that often rewarded privilege over potential. Every sentence she spoke built on the last, not through anger or frustration, but through clarity and compassion. She explained that scholarships weren't handouts. They were investments in talent, in ambition, and in the future of society. People nodded along, some whispering in agreement, others scribbling notes. Barron watched, leaning forward this time, still skeptical but intrigued. He wasn't used to seeing arguments made without theatrics, without the need to dominate a room with presence alone. Jasmine's words were quiet but powerful. There was no shouting, no exaggeration, just truth laid out plainly, and it made him uncomfortable in ways he hadn't expected. Then came the first question from the panel moderator. It was polite, but it challenged the assumptions in Jasmine's narrative. How do we balance support for students like Miguel with the need to reward merit and academic excellence? The question was sharp but fair. Jasmine smiled slightly, not because she had an easy answer, but because she welcomed the challenge. Excellence matters, she said, but potential cannot be ignored. Someone who has to work 2 jobs to survive is still capable of great achievement. The problem is opportunity, not talent. She paused, letting the words sink in. It wasn't a speech. It was a conversation, a call to consider what fairness truly meant. Around her, students began to murmur among themselves, some agreeing quietly, others raising eyebrows thoughtfully. Barron's eyes narrowed slightly, the smirk fading further. He wasn't used to hearing challenges that didn't revolve around wealth, status, or strategy. This was something else. This was empathy in action, and for a moment, he felt it, though he didn't yet want to admit it. Jasmine moved into the next part of her argument. She described how small acts of support, like a scholarship, mentorship, or access to resources, could change lives. Miguel wasn't a statistic. He was a young man with hopes, fears, and ambition. Every opportunity denied to him because of money wasn't just unfair. It was a waste of potential, a loss for society. She spoke of dreams deferred, of talents hidden because the system favored those who could afford the cost of admission. Her words were carefully chosen, clear, and emotionally grounded. They weren't designed to provoke guilt, but to illuminate reality. The audience listened, rapt. Even the professors, usually reserved, leaned forward slightly. The message was simple, yet profound. Success shouldn't be predetermined by birthright or bank account. It should be determined by effort, by passion, by the willingness to pursue one's goals despite obstacles. Jasmine's delivery was calm, precise, but full of conviction. She didn't shout. She didn't demand agreement. She simply presented reality in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Barron's smirk was gone now. He had witnessed something he hadn't expected. A perspective that challenged his assumptions about fairness and success. He felt a slight pang of discomfort, an unfamiliar realization that not everyone had the same starting point in life. The debate wasn't about winning, it was about truth. And Jasmine had a clarity and honesty that demanded attention, even from someone as guarded as him. By the end of her opening remarks, the auditorium had fallen into an attentive silence. The low buzz of conversation had quieted, replaced by reflection. People weren't just hearing words, they were imagining lives, struggles, and possibilities. And in that moment, Barron realized that this debate wasn't about him. It wasn't about privilege, or smirks, or appearances. It was about understanding, perspective, and the responsibility to consider lives beyond one's own. As Jasmine stepped back slightly, the moderator nodded in acknowledgement, signaling the beginning of a discussion that would explore fairness, merit, and empathy. Barron leaned back in his chair, thoughtful, silent, and for the first time that day, unsure. The room was ready for conversation, but more importantly, one student had already begun to shift the thinking of someone who had assumed he already knew everything. And in that quiet, powerful moment, the stage was set. Not for argument alone, but for reflection, understanding, and a debate that would challenge assumptions, question comfort zones, and perhaps change a mind or two, including Barron's. The discussion deepened as the moderator leaned forward, signaling that it was time to explore the heart of the debate: fairness, merit, and opportunity. Jasmine had made her opening statement, painting a vivid picture of Miguel and the obstacles students like him faced. Now the focus shifted to opposing perspectives, and Nathan, a fellow student known for his sharp intellect and quick reasoning, raised his hand. His expression was calm but firm, his tone measured. "Jasmine, I respect your point," he said, "but we have to consider that resources are limited. Scholarships, grants, and support systems can't reach every student. Isn't it fair to prioritize those who have proven themselves academically? Shouldn't achievement come first?" The room hummed with quiet murmurs. Some students nodded in agreement, appreciating Nathan's practical approach. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the question touched on a moral and social tension that didn't have a simple answer. Jasmine paused, her eyes sweeping across the audience before returning to Nathan. "Excellence matters," she acknowledged, "but potential cannot be overlooked. Someone working 2 jobs to survive, someone who can't afford tutoring or textbooks, may still have the talent and determination to excel if given a fair chance. Merit isn't only about grades, it's about what a person can achieve with opportunity." Nathan's brow furrowed slightly and he leaned forward. "But if we focus too much on potential without measurable achievement, how do we ensure fairness? Should we lower standards or reward effort over results? Isn't there a risk of dependence if we prioritize aid over self-reliance?" Jasmine nodded again, showing she understood his concern. "Supporting students doesn't mean lowering standards," she said. "It means creating conditions where everyone has the opportunity to meet those standards. If Miguel has the same chance to succeed as someone born into privilege, then achievement truly reflects effort and ability, not circumstance. Isn't that the kind of fairness we want?" The audience was tense, caught between 2 valid arguments. Nathan represented the voice of reason and discipline, emphasizing personal responsibility, meritocracy, and the practical limitations of resources. Jasmine represented empathy, inclusivity, and moral responsibility, advocating for a system that considers the human stories behind statistics. Both viewpoints resonated, and the debate was no longer about abstract policy. It had become personal, relatable, and real. Barron, seated in the front row, was watching with growing attention. The smirk that had been planted on his face earlier had softened into curiosity. He leaned slightly forward, intrigued, realizing that the discussion was more nuanced than he had anticipated. Nathan's points made sense on paper, but Jasmine's perspective made him think about lives he had never considered. For the first time, he questioned assumptions he hadn't realized he held. Jasmine continued, illustrating her point with examples beyond Miguel. She spoke of students who had the talent and drive but lacked access to mentors, workshops, and academic networks. She described a young woman named Priya who excelled in science, but couldn't attend summer programs because her family couldn't afford them. She explained how these small gaps compounded over time, turning potential into frustration and sometimes even failure. Her words were vivid but simple, her tone respectful yet persuasive. She wasn't attacking Nathan's viewpoint. She was expanding it, inviting the audience to see what existed beyond the numbers. Nathan listened attentively. He wasn't dismissive. His eyes reflected thoughtfulness. He responded by acknowledging the validity of Jasmine's examples but emphasizing sustainability. "I understand your stories," he said, "but we have to design systems that are sustainable. We can't give resources to every deserving student. That's why achievement should guide distribution. It's measurable, accountable, and fair in a different way." The debate unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Jasmine pressed the human angle, showing how rigid reliance on measurable achievement often excluded talented individuals facing systemic barriers. Nathan countered with practicality, pointing out that a system without measurable criteria could unintentionally create favoritism or inefficiency. Each argument reinforced the other, creating tension but also a sense of balance. Listeners weren't just hearing one side. They were seeing both, feeling the complexity of the choices involved. Barron's expression shifted again. He was no longer amused. He found himself thinking of Miguel, Priya, and countless others he had never known personally. He realized that merit alone didn't guarantee opportunity, and that effort without support often went unseen. It was a subtle awakening, and though he didn't speak, the change in his demeanor was noticeable. Jasmine then posed a reflective question to the audience. If someone has the ability and determination to succeed, but the system denies them a fair chance, are we rewarding true merit, or just privilege? Her words hung in the air. Students whispered among themselves, some nodding quietly, others frowning, considering their own experiences. The question wasn't rhetorical. It demanded introspection. Nathan answered briefly, acknowledging that the point was fair, but reiterating that practical constraints required measurable standards. The moderator interjected to keep the pace lively. "Let's explore solutions," they suggested. "How can we balance potential and achievement? How do we support students without creating dependence, while ensuring fairness and sustainability?" This shifted the debate from abstract ideas to concrete possibilities. Jasmine suggested mentorship programs, sliding-scale scholarships, and partnerships with local businesses to create paid internships for students with financial need. Nathan suggested a rigorous but flexible evaluation system, where potential could be recognized alongside academic performance, without overwhelming resources. The room responded positively to both approaches. Students leaned forward, some jotting down notes, others whispering excitedly to friends. Barron's attention never wavered. He realized that the debate wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about exploring solutions, thinking critically, and recognizing complexity. It wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a conversation about values, ethics, and responsibility. As the discussion progressed, Jasmine shared more personal reflections. She described sleepless nights watching friends struggle with tuition, the anxiety of seeing potential wasted, and the quiet determination to advocate for fairness. Her honesty resonated. Nathan countered with scenarios of how unstructured aid could backfire, emphasizing that planning, accountability, and evaluation were necessary for meaningful support. The dialogue wasn't adversarial. It was dynamic, respectful, and intellectually engaging. By the end of the session, the audience had seen a complete spectrum of thought. Jasmine had humanized the issue, showing the impact of circumstance on potential. Nathan had grounded the discussion in practical reality, ensuring the conversation remained accountable and organized. Both perspectives had value, and the students left thinking, not with answers imposed, but with questions to explore further. Barron sat silently, absorbing everything. The smirk that had defined his demeanor at the start was completely gone. He realized that what seemed trivial at first glance, the struggles of students like Miguel or Priya, was actually a profound moral and social issue. He felt a subtle shift in understanding, a recognition that fairness wasn't just about rules, but about seeing the world from the perspectives of others. And in that fast-moving debate, where ideas collided respectfully and stories met statistics, the first cracks in Barron's certainty began to show. He hadn't spoken yet, but he didn't need to. Witnessing Jasmine and Nathan weighing human empathy against structured fairness, he began to understand that real-life solutions required nuance, balance, and courage to confront uncomfortable truths. By the time the moderator wrapped up part 2 of the discussion, the stage was set for deeper exploration. The audience had been engaged, minds had been challenged, and even Barron was quietly reevaluating his assumptions. The conversation wasn't over. It was only just gaining momentum, and the stakes felt higher, more personal, and undeniably real. The auditorium had settled into a focused hush after the rigorous exchange between Jasmine and Nathan. The discussion had already stirred curiosity, challenged assumptions, and opened minds. Now Jasmine took a deeper, more personal approach. She knew that statistics and general arguments could convince only so much. To make her point resonate, she had to bring the debate into the human realm, the lived experiences of students struggling against obstacles far beyond their control. She began by telling the story of her younger brother, Malik. He was bright, driven, and determined to succeed, but financial hardship had constantly shadowed his ambitions. Jasmine described how Malik juggled long school days with evening shifts at a local diner, sometimes skipping meals to save money, staying up late to finish assignments by the dim light of a desk lamp. She didn't embellish. She simply narrated. The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the silent prayers before exams. The audience could feel the tension, empathize with the struggles, and imagine the weight carried by a young person who had talent but not opportunity. Jasmine's voice remained steady, but there was an undercurrent of emotion, hard-earned understanding, frustration, and hope. Malik had the potential to excel, she said. He could have achieved anything if he had access to the resources others take for granted. But without help, talent alone was never enough. Her words painted a vivid picture without drama, simple yet compelling, making the debate no longer abstract. Students who had previously been observers felt the reality of the problem. Some shifted in their seats, thinking about their own struggles, or those of friends. Even professors leaned in, aware that this argument was moving beyond logic and into morality and empathy. Nathan responded respectfully, acknowledging the story. He understood the emotional weight and the moral urgency, but he emphasized accountability and sustainability. I see Malik's situation, he said, and it's heartbreaking. But we also have to make sure our support structures are fair and manageable. If resources are spread too thin or given without evaluation, we risk undermining the very system we're trying to protect. Jasmine countered immediately, not defensively, but with clarity. Support isn't about handing everything to someone, she explained. It's about creating pathways. Scholarships, mentorship, and guidance don't replace effort. They amplify it. They give someone the tools to turn potential into achievement. Without them, talent is wasted, dreams are delayed, and society loses more than we realize. The discussion was no longer just philosophical, it was human. Jasmine introduced another story, that of Priya, a student from a small town who had exceptional aptitude in science, but could not attend a summer research program due to costs. Priya had ideas that could have contributed to her field, but she couldn't access the networks others could, Jasmine said. Her brilliance wasn't lacking, her drive wasn't missing, but the opportunity was. That's the real injustice. Nathan nodded, conceding the point emotionally even if he remained firm logically. I understand, he said, but how do we make sure these interventions are fair for everyone? If we focus too much on potential, how do we measure who receives help? What prevents favoritism? Jasmine's answer was measured, thoughtful. We design systems that recognize both potential and achievement. Mentorship programs, needs-based scholarships, internships, these don't replace standards, they enhance them. They make success accessible without compromising fairness. True merit should reflect effort and ability, not privilege. The audience responded with quiet murmurs of approval. The balance was delicate, but Jasmine's ability to humanize the debate made the argument relatable. She wasn't simply advocating policy. She was illustrating lived consequences. Every statistic she had mentioned earlier became a face, a story, a life that deserved consideration. Barron, still in the front row, felt a subtle but undeniable shift within himself. The stories were piercing. For the first time, he considered the lives of students like Malik and Priya in human terms, rather than abstract examples. He realized he had been observing with distance, judging situations without full context. Now he felt discomfort, a recognition that he had been complacent, seeing the world through privilege without fully understanding hardship. The smirk on his face had completely disappeared, replaced by an expression of attentiveness and reflection. Jasmine pressed further, connecting the human stories to broader societal implications. When we deny opportunity based on circumstance, she said, we don't just harm the individual, we limit innovation, progress, and social growth. Every student who doesn't get a fair chance is a potential scientist, teacher or leader lost to the world. Her words were simple but carried weight, linking personal struggle to collective responsibility. Nathan's tone softened. He realized the discussion was evolving beyond theoretical arguments into real-world stakes. "I see what you mean," he admitted. "There's a moral obligation here, but we still need to ensure solutions are practical. Idealism alone isn't enough." Jasmine smiled slightly, acknowledging his point without retreating. "Practicality and empathy can coexist," she said. "Systems can be designed to support students without lowering standards or creating dependency. It's about creating balance, not choosing one over the other." The debate grew more dynamic. Students in the audience began to share small insights and nod in agreement with both sides. The conversation was no longer simply a panel discussion. It was a shared exploration of fairness, morality, and social responsibility. The complexity of the issues became evident. There was no single solution, but understanding multiple perspectives allowed for more nuanced thinking. Barron's mind was racing. The clarity of Jasmine's examples combined with her calm, confident delivery created a realization he couldn't ignore. He imagined the sleepless nights of students like Malik, the frustration of untapped talent like Priya's, and the larger societal loss caused by inequality. 5 seconds ago, he might have dismissed this as an abstract debate. Now, it felt urgent and personal. Jasmine continued, urging the audience to consider their role. "It's easy to talk about fairness in theory," she said, "but in practice, it requires attention, action, and willingness to challenge assumptions. We need to ask ourselves, are we creating conditions where talent can thrive? Or are we simply preserving comfort and convenience for the privileged?" Her words cut through the quiet hum of contemplation. The moderator then invited reflections from the audience, opening the floor for engagement. Students shared examples from their own experiences, some struggling with financial burdens, others seeing friends fail to achieve despite immense talent. Each contribution reinforced the human angle, confirming that the discussion wasn't merely intellectual, it was deeply personal and universally relevant. Barron, sitting silently, absorbed the conversation. The smirk that had defined him was gone. He realized that observation without understanding was meaningless. Real engagement required empathy, reflection, and humility. Jasmine's stories had accomplished what arguments alone could not. They had created connection, understanding, and emotional resonance. By the end of Part 3, the debate had transformed. What started as an exchange of ideas had become a forum for reflection, empathy, and critical thinking. Barron's perspective had shifted subtly but significantly. He understood now that fairness involved more than rules and merit. It required insight into the human struggles behind statistics and a willingness to act responsibly when opportunity allowed. The stage was set for the final part of the story. The conversation had laid the groundwork for revelation, growth, and understanding. The audience was fully engaged, thinking deeply, and ready to see the resolution unfold. And for Barron, who had started the day with a smirk, the shift had begun. A quiet internal acknowledgement that what he had observed for amusement was, in reality, a matter of conscience, perspective, and moral reflection. The final segment of the debate was approaching, and the auditorium was thick with anticipation. Jasmine had laid out the human side of the argument. Nathan had presented the practical perspective, and the audience had been pulled into a dynamic conversation that balanced empathy and logic. Now, the focus shifted toward resolution, reflection, and the subtle transformation of minds. Barron, seated in the front row, felt a tension he hadn't anticipated. The smirk that had accompanied him at the start of the day had completely vanished. He leaned forward slightly, realizing that what had begun as casual observation had evolved into personal introspection. Jasmine stood and addressed the audience directly, not as a lecturer, but as someone inviting them to consider real consequences. "We've heard arguments about merit, achievement, and resources," she said. "But let's pause and ask, what do we lose if we only reward measurable success? How many talents go unseen? How many dreams are delayed, or even destroyed, because the system favors convenience over fairness?" Her words resonated, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. They painted a picture of lost potential that couldn't be ignored. Nathan responded, calmly acknowledging her point. "It's undeniable that we miss opportunities when we overlook potential, but we must also ensure that solutions are implementable and sustainable. Idealism without structure can falter." His words reminded the audience that the balance between empathy and practicality was delicate, and both were necessary for meaningful change. Jasmine nodded, accepting the nuance. "I agree, Nathan," she said. "Structure is important, but compassion can coexist with practicality. When we design systems that recognize both effort and circumstances, we don't dilute standards. We amplify opportunity." She shifted her tone slightly, engaging the audience further. "Imagine a student like Miguel, standing on the edge of possibility. If we give him the resources he needs, we don't just help one individual. We contribute to society as a whole. Every talent nurtured is a benefit to everyone." The moderator then invited a reflective moment. The room grew quiet. Students, professors, and guests alike absorbed the weight of Jasmine's message. Some were nodding slowly, thinking about their own experiences and the inequities they had witnessed. Barron, however, felt a unique and personal shift. The stories, the debate, and the examples she shared had pierced his usual distance. He realized that he had observed this discussion as if it were entertainment, as if it were someone else's problem. But now, he saw the moral urgency, the human reality behind the argument. As the panel opened for questions, Barron found himself silently analyzing his own assumptions. He had always believed that merit alone should determine success. He had assumed that hard work naturally led to opportunity, that life systems were neutral. But Jasmine had shown him that reality was far more complex. Talent, drive, and effort often collided with barriers beyond anyone's control. Privilege created paths that others could never access, and the absence of support wasn't a reflection of laziness. It was a structural obstacle. Jasmine continued with one final story, saving the most compelling for last. She spoke of a student named Daniel, a young man with a gift for mathematics, whose family struggled with medical bills and rent. Daniel's brilliance could have led him to prestigious programs, groundbreaking research, or even entrepreneurial success. Yet without financial support, mentorship, and guidance, Daniel's potential was stifled. Jasmine's description wasn't dramatic. It was matter of fact. The audience could feel the weight of the lost opportunities. They could imagine the frustration, the quiet resignation, and the sense of injustice that accompanied such circumstances. Nathan responded with empathy this time, his tone softer. "Stories like Daniel's make it clear that we need thoughtful intervention," he said. "Practicality still matters, but human realities can't be ignored. We have to design systems that are fair and achievable, while still addressing these inequities." The debate had reached a pivotal point, and Barron's attention sharpened. He realized that the discussion wasn't about winning or losing. It was about recognizing what fairness truly required. It was about seeing the lives behind the statistics, understanding the human consequences of policy decisions, and confronting the discomfort that comes from privilege and assumption. For the first time, he felt a pang of responsibility. Jasmine then posed the final question, directed not just at the panel, but at the audience itself. If we have the ability to help someone reach their potential, should we turn away because it challenges our comfort or forces us to reconsider our assumptions? The silence that followed was profound. Students whispered among themselves, reflecting. Professors nodded thoughtfully. Even Nathan paused, weighing the moral gravity of the question. Barron felt it deeply. He realized that his initial smirk had been a shield, a defense against engagement, against confronting the reality he had ignored. But now, he could no longer hide behind amusement. After a pause, Barron found himself standing. It was instinctive, not performative. He approached Jasmine quietly, stepping out of the observer role and into participation. I hadn't thought about it this way," he said, voice low but sincere. "You've shown me something I didn't see before. I realized I was looking at things too abstractly, too comfortably. There's more to fairness than I considered." Jasmine smiled gently, recognizing the honesty in his admission. "It's not about agreeing or disagreeing, Barron," she said. "It's about reflection, about seeing perspectives different from your own. That's where understanding starts." The room seemed to breathe collectively, as though the dialogue had opened a space for contemplation. Students left with questions, not answers imposed. They had seen a balanced discussion between empathy and practicality, human stories and structured logic, moral obligation and measurable achievement. Barron's transformation was a microcosm of the debate's impact, a tangible example of the way critical reflection and human storytelling could influence even those who appeared indifferent. Jasmine concluded the session with a final reflection for the audience. "We all have the ability to influence fairness, to amplify potential, to consider lives beyond our own experience. Education, opportunity, and talent are not just individual concerns. They are societal responsibilities. The question is, do we act or do we remain passive observers?" The audience remained thoughtful as they filed out of the auditorium. Barron lingered for a moment, reflecting on the stories of Miguel, Priya, Malik, and Daniel. Each story had challenged him in a different way, illuminating the subtle injustices that privilege often hides. He understood now that empathy and critical thinking were not opposites. They were partners. To see clearly was to care, and to care was to act thoughtfully. As he finally left, Barron felt the quiet satisfaction of realization. The smirk that had started the day had transformed into awareness. 5 seconds of reflection, catalyzed by Jasmine's words and the honest, human-centered debate, had undone years of indifference. He didn't feel guilt or shame, only a determination to see beyond convenience, to recognize potential, and to consider the human impact of his assumptions and decisions. Jasmine watched him leave with a calm smile, knowing that the debate had achieved its purpose. The audience had been engaged, minds had been challenged, and even the most skeptical participants had been prompted to reflect on privilege, fairness, and opportunity. It was a subtle victory, not of argument over argument, but of empathy over apathy, understanding over distance. The auditorium emptied slowly, leaving behind a sense of quiet reflection. Students lingered in small groups, discussing the points raised, replaying stories in their minds, and imagining ways to create change in their own spheres. Barron walked through the hall, thoughtful, and for the first time, aware that understanding wasn't enough. Action was required. The seeds planted during the debate had taken root, and in that final, reflective moment, it became clear. True learning wasn't about winning arguments or maintaining appearances. It was about seeing, listening, questioning, and evolving. For Barron, for the students, and for the wider audience who would one day hear these stories, the conversation had changed perspectives, fostered critical thinking, and invited a new way of considering fairness, opportunity, and the responsibility of those who have the power to act.